Coming up on this episode of the Every Breath Counts podcast.
How can I be responsible and accountable for the reputation that I want to build? I came up with this phrase very early on, and the saying is very simple. I choose not to play at that level. You might like me and you might not like me. And that's something that I have to deal with. I've also found out that you can't make fans of everybody, but I really try to live my life every single day in a way where I'm going to operate in a way that my reputation is who I am, and I'm not going to play at that level.
Welcome to the Every Breath Counts podcast. I'm Ryan Shekel, health enthusiast, amateur ultra runner, and award-winning business consultant. And each week, I interview the most accomplished people in the world, from professional and Olympic athletes to CEOs, best-selling authors, and even the occasional magician, to demystify what it takes to achieve success at the highest level. Take what you can from these stories to optimize your mind, your body, and your career so you can make every breath count. Thank you for investing the time in the show and yourself. Now let's get started. Albert Einstein said, "It has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity." My guest today is RJ Maute. RJ has spent over 20 years working for large tech companies like Google. He talks about the evolution of technology from Web 1.0 to 2.0 and now 3.0 and beyond. And we talk about the balance of using technology to improve our lives while not letting it consume everything we and our children do. We also talk about how to create a meaningful first impression, strategies throughout the sales process, and how exactly to build a meaningful network. So if you're curious about when you should get your kids a cell phone, if you want to know exactly how to use technology to optimize your life, then this episode is for you. And if this is your first time here, thanks so much for checking it out. Go ahead and hit that subscribe or follow button wherever you're listening. And the best way to support the podcast is to share it with a friend. So without further ado, welcome to the very first in-studio Every Breath Counts podcast with RJ Maute. RJ, dude, thank you so much. This is the first ever, cheers, the first ever Every Breath Counts in-studio podcast.
In person, to you.
And we're sitting here drinking my infamous old-fashioned.
You do nail it.
Yeah,
it's a good recipe.
It is.
You're
Killcliff.
Not going to reveal it.
No, it's not secret. I've actually revealed it in the past. Killcliff recovery drink. So going back to the healthy, right? Healthy Killcliff recovery drink. Whiskey. This is Buffalo Trace. This is not a sponsored podcast. Shocker that I'm not sponsored yet by Buffalo Trace. And then maple syrup and a little bit of flavored water. Yeah.
This would go down with just about anybody who drinks alcohol. It's that good.
Yeah,
it's unassuming though too.
It is unassuming, but Lisa still hates it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she won't drink. She can't even smell whiskey. Yeah.
Kimberly, my wife from Kentucky, you'd think would drink bourbon.
No.
A lot of her girlfriends do. Not Kim. It's an acquired taste for some
think
people.
The only women I've ever met that really like bourbon, not like some of them will kind of drink it, that like it are from Kentucky.
Yes.
Only ones.
Or raging alcoholics. It's that kind of a fine balance. All right. So we have the bourbon. I have a coffee. I have a water. Is it cool if I smoke in here?
I mean, we're going to have to pee pretty soon probably. But yeah, no, this like true Rogan experience right here.
It would be with a fat cigar. You know what I mean? Yeah. Something like that. Is that the book of Eli behind you?
So this is, RJ is pointing to a book that I have behind me. I don't even think you could see it. You can see it on YouTube if you're watching this right now. Interestingly enough, that is my family's Bible.
Wow.
That is so my family, my like cousin's cousin or whatever is the town historian of Clifton Springs, which is a small little town outside of Syracuse. This is in between Syracuse and Rochester, New York. And our claim to fame, the Shekel claim to fame, is that Benjamin Shekel, my great grandfather, founded the town of Clifton Springs. And he came up right around the time of George Washington from Virginia. And that was our family Bible. So if you look in the cover, it actually has like a bunch of birth and death dates of all these different members of the family from dating back to the early 1800s.
Knowing that and having that type of detail about your ancestry is very rare. Yeah. Most people have no idea about, let alone 2 generations before them, let alone 4 or 5 generations or 6 back to that. So that's really neat. I think having a Bible and having something that, a lot of institutions were built upon, Catholic, Mormon, whatever it might be, is very special, because presently there's so few institutions that we involve ourselves with that aren't a corporation or a business. Right. So that's really neat, having that as an artifact to your living history, to your family, but then also thinking about, all right, who do I involve myself with on a day in, day out basis? What are the institutions that I assign myself to that aren't businesses, that aren't monetary and run via the internet? That's pretty cool.
That's a really interesting thought. And I want to expand on that a little bit, because one of the things that I feel like is really difficult for a lot of people working, and I want to say millennials, but I don't think it's just millennials. I think it's kind of...
Are you a millennial?
I'm a millennial. I'm right at the tail end.
Me too.
I think millennial is what? It's if you are 42 years old right now in 2022.
1980 and beyond.
Yeah, so it's like 40, 41, 42, I think, is the end of the millennial age. I feel like a lot of millennials and everybody, there's been as industry has expanded, I think people tend to identify with the job they have. And I think this is different in the US than abroad. And I could be wrong about that. But if you were to ask somebody, so say we meet for the first time, I think one of the first questions I would ask you is, what do you do? And it's an interesting idea, because why am I asking you what you do? I'm not asking who you are. I'm not asking like what you're interested in. I'm not asking about, where you came from, and maybe where are you from came first. But it's like, what do you do? And that's almost like your identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have strong feelings about this. Having graduated from college in 2004 and going immediately into corporate America, I started working for a Fortune 100 company. And all my peers were age 45 to 60 years old. I was, 22, 23 at the time. And I'd watch these people, have their exchanges. And the first thing that would come out of their mouth is, my name is so-and-so. What do you do for a living? Who do you work with?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself at that point, I knew that is not how I want to live my life. I want to get to know you for who you are. Oh, your family's from Clifton Springs. You founded it there. Oh, what do you like to do? What are you interested in? You like to run. Oh, interesting. Do you do this? Do you do that? Not be defined by, I work for this corporation and this is what I do. And that was very, very prevalent in 2004 when I started. I mean, I watched a majority of people lead with that, and then define and judge people by that role, responsibility, and company that they worked for. And I knew, no, that's not how I ever want to be. I won't lead with, what do you do for a living?
But it's crazy though, because you think about those guys, and when you're coming out of college, you look up to them in a way, because they have success, right? So you're meeting these people who are supposed to be, I don't know, mentors, role models, or titans of business, whatever you may call them.
Sure.
But they're kind of like leading you down this path that you don't want to necessarily go down. So like, are they happy? I mean, there's a lot of ways you could take that. Are they happy? What is success to them? I mean, why do you think that it's that way? In my opinion, it seems like that because you're trying to build a business relationship, that's just the way that works, right? That's the setting. That's maybe you're out for a drink with your company. So that's kind of like the way you've been introduced. But why isn't it the other way? Why can it be?
It's difficult. I think, a lot of people work themselves into kind of a rote process where the cool thing about the cycles that you and I have and the industries that we have is it really allows us to hone our communication skills and our interpersonal communication skills, like the ability to sit across from the table and talk to people and understand kind of where they're coming from. But sometimes people tend to over rotate, where they talk so much about their day-to-day life or day-to-day business life that carries over to their personal life, and they can't claw their way back from that. So, I have all these thoughts and conversations that have happened over the past 20 years. And, without naming names, you kind of work with these people and you find, all right, what's their strong suit? What are their attributes that got them to be super successful? What are the things that they do when I'm around them that make me uncomfortable, or realize that's something that I don't want to do? And I think we all have it. Like, what are the things that I do today in an exchange with my wife, in exchange with my children, in exchange with my business colleagues or my peers or my friends, that I shouldn't be doing anymore? And people don't like really knowing the things that they shouldn't be doing anymore. If it's a verbal tick, or if it's, a topic of conversation that they lead with. So you gotta be open to it. You got to grasp what you can from people. I learn a ton from you. I feel fortunate that at 40 years old in my life, or 39 years old when we first met, that I came across somebody who's open to having a real dialogue, to kind of surpass, like, the outward appearance of how I may or may not be. And I can take a lot from you. I can learn a lot from you. And I hope that I can, reciprocate that and exchange that with you.
Yeah, it's the same. What's something that you do that you've identified that you don't like?
Yeah.
Because I've got a
Yeah. So I would say that through the past 2 years, I've definitely lost my edge when it comes to really being open to conversation and being quick-witted with, kind of receiving how people are talking to me, understanding where they're coming from, and then trying to be on the same page. My cycles have come down. They've ramped up from a online portion, of being on Zoom or Google Meet or Microsoft, whatever it might be. But the inner, like, face-to-face communication has gone down. So to answer your question specifically, sometimes I might not be listening to what somebody is saying and understanding where they're coming from. I might already have a perception in my mind of where they're trying to go, rather than hear them out further.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat of a sales thing, right? And we both do sales. And it's funny because you go to any sales training, right? And the training is always, it's 80% listening, 20% talking. And for me, it's a very similar issue. It's the thought that I need to. There's so many things going through my head of that. I've got selling points, right? I've got to hit this. I got to hit this. I got to hit this. And it's like forcing that conversation. It's telling, like, oh, you need this. So here's the solution, blah, 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 and it's just rattling it on. Whereas as I've grown in my career and gotten more comfortable in the fact that I don't have to force decisions down people's, mindset, I think I've learned more that listening is so much more important. It's unfortunate that it's taken like 20 years to figure that out, but at the same time, I'm fortunate that I have it. And it's always that tendency to fall back into that when you're uncomfortable. You meet new people, you get into a stressful sales call. Like, I don't know how many times you're talking to, you have your normal people you talk to, but then all of a sudden you get into this conversation where now you're with, a higher up that has decision-making ability, and you get nervous. Your heart rate starts to increase a little bit, and you tend to fall back on those tendencies that you're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's always talking.
Right.
So I'll talk myself out of that issue, but oftentimes I talk myself into a bigger
You're
issue.
right. Yeah. I'm totally on board with that. It's, the anxiety of having a new conversation with somebody who can make a decision, I would say has increased during COVID for me, right? Because I'm doing these web meetings and whatnot. And it's nice to be a customer, right? The reality is a customer can really dictate when we're going to meet, how we're going to meet. If we don't meet, there needs to be, no notification of them not meeting. But I recently had a conversation with a customer, and it made me think about my reputation. And, reputations aren't portable, right? So everything that I accomplished at my first company over the course of 6 years, or my second company over the course of 7 years, or, now even at Google, just having been there a year, my reputation, even though I had a great reputation at each of those companies, I need to reestablish that with people that I work with internal, and then obviously the new clients that are exposed to me. So I was meeting with this CIO of a manufacturing company, of a international global manufacturing company within the past 2 weeks. And I really wanted to convey to him that I was here to make their business successful, and not successful in my eyes against the numbers and the attainment and the goals that I have, but really on what their initiatives were. And talk is cheap. Like that's a could be considered an insincere thought,
Yeah.
right? Because I can't prove it to him yet. It's going to take me months, if not years, to prove that out. And even like with friendship, even with you, like my reputation of who I've built over the past 40 years or 20 years as an adult, like you don't know my reputation. You know me for, the friendship that we've built over the course of the past 18, 24, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious though, because I think first impressions are so important. Like, and that's what you're talking about, right? Like you're talking about this, your reputation and your reputation. Like you could build a reputation in 60 seconds and you can ruin a reputation in 60 seconds. Like that's true. That first 60 seconds is tough. So when you're meeting with someone for the first time, what are you thinking about in terms of making a solid first impression?
Yeah. Yeah. Obviously, we all think about how articulate are we? Is what I'm saying coming across as, thought provoking, intelligent? It's very, very, very important for me. And I really try to work on this, to listen, to be present, not to be, distracted by a thousand distractions that we have, and to make the first person feel that the time that they're spending with me and communicating with me is being received. Because, communication is in the hands of the receiver. What I'm saying doesn't mean anything unless you are picking it up. It makes sense to you, and we can, establish a back and forth dialogue. So, I want to be timely. I want to be clean. I want to be courteous. I want to be all the things that our parents wanted us to be, as they were raising us. But then I also want to be, heartfelt, sincere.
It's crazy. It's so funny that like you and I have done sales for about, 15, 20 years each, right? So we're super experienced in this. We couldn't have two different sales careers than I think any two people doing sales, right? Doing technology, meetings, selling products versus doing medical device and my industry. And I think a lot of the same things still stick. Like I think there's a lot of just core principles. And when I think about a first time reputation, right? When I'm looking to make an impression, I think it's probably pretty consistent in friendships. I think it's consistent in meeting with new people that I'm working with. I think it's consistent meeting with new clients. But what I would say is the first thing that I like to do is kind of feel out the room a little bit, and understand a little bit of how comfortable everyone is in the situation they are, right? So if it's a new client and I work with surgeons, like what's their personality type? Are they type A? Do they want to have the keys to the car? Are they telling you what they need? Or are they someone who is analytic and wants to just absorb information? And so my first perception as I'm walking up is like, how are they interacting with so and so? How are they, if it's a surgeon and they're washing their hands, getting ready to go in the operating room, and I'm meeting for the first time, like, how did they just interact with the nurse? How did they just interact with the patient? Like, are they just take charge? What's their vocal tone? What's their posture? Right? Like everything. And as soon as I have that, then I kind of come in a little bit, depending on who it is, a little bit more soft spoken. Hello, hey, my name's Ryan. But if there's someone who seems like super receptive, like jovial, like come in with a joke, But the main thing that I want them to take away from my first meeting with them is like, I don't want them to kind of, in one way, I almost want them to be like, almost forget about me. Like not forget, but like, I don't want to make such a strong impression that they're turned off. Right. So it's like, okay, I want them to remember me, but not be like, oh my gosh, that guy? So it's a little bit of that, but I just want them to be like, I liked it better when he was here. And that's just what I want the takeaway to be. Whether it's the first time I meet, like, hey, I really like that guy. I'd like to talk to him again. Or if I'm in an operating room with a surgeon, I like operating when Ryan's here. And that's really it. Like, if I can win that, like, that's my first win. That's what I'm looking for. Like, hey, that was a good experience. I like him. I want him here more often.
Feeling positive, like having, hey, I get the sense when I'm around this person that it's a positive feeling, a good image, like a good image of what we're trying to accomplish. And you do a really nice job. And I've only been exposed to it now, like realistically a couple times in dialogue with you, of asking a question, understanding where I'm coming from, but then bringing back up what the question was and then sharing your thoughts. Like that's mastery. That's really that's a good attribute that you have. And I've seen you do it a couple times now. Once in the car when we're driving to go get sushi, and then today. I think the commonality of what you're saying, and it's kind of like the basis of where I've led all my relationships, is people ultimately like talking about themselves.
Yeah.
And when you can get somebody into a comfort zone of sharing with you who they are, or it could be about a litany of different ideas, but you can get that person talking about their best topic themselves, that's when you start to build rapport and relationship. And then potentially, in my mind, it's very difficult to have a sale without doing that. I've not really been successful modern day selling without being able to have the back and forth to understand where people are coming from. And that's the relationship is such an important portion of how I've been successful today.
Yeah, it's crazy because you could do so much research into people too, with LinkedIn, with Google, with anything. So generally, before I approach any new customer, or even, I mean, when you're interviewing someone, like if you don't Google yourself, have you ever Googled yourself?
Yes.
It's crazy. Something you're like, wow, people can find out everything about me. And now, having a podcast, like there's a lot of me out there now, right? So I'm exposed, but some people don't have a lot. But I always try to Google, LinkedIn, whatever it is. And it's always like, remember when we were growing up, there's like that, was it 7 Degrees of Separation from Kevin Bacon? Or
Yes. Yeah.
what was it? I don't remember what that was called.
I think that's what it was.
But it was like, you could find 6 people or 7 people that got you to Kevin Bacon if you're looking at like different movies or something like that, because he was exposed to so many different people and so many movies. And that to me is one of the most powerful ways to build a relationship, is having a commonality. So like a common person that you guys know, right? So in my industry, look, there's only I'm not gonna say a handful, but there's only so many orthopedic surgeons in North America. So there's only a handful, realistically, of really good fellowship programs. And then if you have to go to university of some sort for residency, and that's a 5-year process. So people come out of, this residency program, then this fellowship program, and in their career, if you know people everywhere, you can usually kind of connect the dots, especially if they went to a really well-known educational program. So for me, like finding that common person is so important, because now all of a sudden it's, hey, like, do you remember so-and-so from the Duke residency program? It's like, oh yeah. Oh, that guy, Cliff. Oh, he was the best. He was my mentor, Tell him hello, shoot him a text. Let's FaceTime him right now. And it's like that, you probably do this, like testimonial. That's so important in sales. Like knowing that someone that you respect bought from you, like that's so powerful for a client.
And that ties us back to that reputation standpoint, right? Like if you can find a degree or two of separation and somebody that you have common ground with, and that person knows you, it just accelerates everything. It's amazing. The other like really important aspect of what you just talked about is the ability to have different, I look back at the network now, right?
Yeah.
So I moved from Rochester in 2000, not knowing anybody, down to Cincinnati. And I was in Cincinnati, for 4 years. And then I moved to Raleigh, and then I moved back to Cincinnati, and then I moved to Rochester. Long story boring, just those moves, and not terrific moves, not out of the country, to Ohio and to North Carolina. The network is massive.
Yeah.
And then when you start to look, especially in a tool like LinkedIn, people people that are second or third, type of connection,
Yeah.
it's broad. It becomes tens of thousands of people quickly. You know what I mean? And that again helps the network. And you can always say, you were there at that portion of time when you were there working with, did you know so-and-so? Oh, you did know them. I know that too, type of thing.
It's crazy. I was looking when I started this podcast. There's a couple podcasters that I look up to and respect. One of them by the name of Jordan Harbinger, and he has this online course, like this email course, whatever it is. And he always like ends his podcast with, "How do I get such great guests on my podcast? Well, it's my network, right? And if you want to build a network like me, check out my email course." And so I checked it out. And a lot of it is just kind of like basic networking 101. But one of the things he talked about was like, there's ways to re-engage your network, and just silly little trick. He's like, why don't you send a text to someone you haven't talked to in 5 years? Like, who's doing that? Right. So I started doing it, and I was like, hey, so-and-so, like, it's It's been a while. I hope you're doing well. And then like re-engaging that network, not just to like build a network, not for personal gain, like the happiness that gave me.
Sure.
It's like re-engage some people that like I cared about, that I was close to, that I lost touch with.
Totally agree. Something I like to do in my downtime, and my downtime means when I'm not on a client call or the kids aren't home, throughout the day, is I go through my phone and I will randomly call people like that I'm close with. I like doing that. And I'm talking about like people over 20 or 30 years. So now, you and I have established, a way to communicate. I like just kind of checking in every once in a while. And it's not because it might be because I'm bored. I just want to be like, hey man, what's going on? What are you up to? Now, the other thing that I think that I do very poorly and I could probably enhance is I undervalue how important social media is. LinkedIn, right? I have 1,600 connections on LinkedIn. I don't know if that's a lot or if that's a little. I don't really care, but I'm not present on LinkedIn. I'm not a Luddite. We talked about this before. I grew up in technology. I've sold probably, like, just rough numbers, $250 million in IT sales.
How's this LinkedIn thing work?
I don't use LinkedIn. I don't use I don't use Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or any of those platforms. I don't. And I think the reason why is I saw how addictive they can be for me. And when you work on a computer and you're constantly doing email and you're doing exchanges and you're spending 8, 9, 10 hours a day on the computer, I found myself going home or being home and then continuing to be on the computer. And there's just no end to it. So now I see all these people kind of creating a lot of traction in their network through LinkedIn. I'm like, man, that's a really good selling tool. That's a really good communication tool, a relationship tool that I'm kind of missing out on. But I don't really, I work for Google, but I don't really, espouse all the things I should be doing from a social networking plan.
I think it goes back to some of the things we were talking about though, because LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, when done wrong, are done terribly wrong. It's the most self-serving, right? Maybe I'm wrong about it's like, this is what I had for dinner. I think that's different, right? Like food selfies, because, okay, food's cool, whatever, but a lot of people, food is cool. A lot of people, when they're using LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, it's just like me. What I've realized, it's so interesting because I've been trying to like grow Instagram, is if you like reach out to someone, you like their pictures, you like their videos, you follow them, you can send them a direct message, right? I've built some interesting relationships with people on Instagram just around like similar interests, but it was never me saying like, this is what I'm doing. And a lot of the stuff I post is that. It's always been from me reaching out and being like, hey, that's cool. What do you think about this? Like, tell me more about why you think this. And it was like a collaboration. It was a back and forth, but it was through the direct message. It was through the back and forth, the connection, like the conversation. It wasn't through the post itself. So I think a lot of people end up trying to like put posts up thinking that they're building a network online. And even if they're getting friends and connections on LinkedIn, I just don't value them the same if you're not using them correctly. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of uncharted territory for me in that space. And as important as it is for me to understand these tools and how I interact with them in my life, like the greater challenge, the bigger obstacle for me is how I present these type of things to my kids, like what they can and cannot do. Because my opinions are largely like, I would rather be face to face. I want to be present. I want to enjoy genuine relationships. I don't want to demean the stuff that people are able to achieve on through social media and whatnot. So I need to somehow, find a balance for how my kids are introduced to it and how I allow them to use it. And if it's positive or not positive in their lives. And I have a lot of questions.
What questions do you have? Right. This is important, I think, for a lot of people that maybe our age that are thinking about this, because it's not going away. It's just not, and while we may want to interact face to face, like there's people out there that think that at some point Like we're just going to be sitting in pods in a virtual world. We may be doing this virtually. Look, we've talked about, this is the first face-to-face podcast I've done. I like this better, but 63 podcasts before this.
Number one, baby. Woo!
63 podcasts before this were face-to-face on a computer. We were in a virtual augmented reality, right? Like it was a virtual room where two people, myself and someone else, sat together talking. This is more fun, but the other one's not going away. So like, what are these questions? Can we get to the bottom of some of it right now?
So let's talk through this first. Yeah. I feel privileged to be your first in-face podcast. Thank you very much. And this has been on the books for at least several weeks. There's been a lot of planning that's gone into this. So thank you. The second thing is, so how do we work through how important social media is, virtual relationships, and how do we, make that understood for our children? I have to give a little bit of a background, just so you kind of like understand personally where I'm coming from. So I worked for Cisco Systems, and a lot of people probably are or are not familiar with Cisco, but Cisco, large in part, created a protocol called TCP/IP.
What's that?
Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol. And they built this I would say like maybe late 80s, really for universities, for colleges to exchange data and information, over the internet, over the web. So they built the internet. So without Cisco, Al Gore may have had a influence on it, but the idea was creating something called Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, which allowed universities to talk to one another. And that's now the basis for everything that the internet is. So in order to have the internet, you have to have a router. A router basically sends and receives packets of information. Cisco developed the router. Their business has grown to involve many more things out of the router, but their core competency, their number one product, their only product was an internet router, a network router. So that's the foundation for my whole career. I started with, all right, how do companies talk to one another and use the internet to do that? Then I went to a company called NetApp, and nobody knows Net. I've worked for all Fortune 200 companies that do, several $1 billion in top line revenue a year that nobody knows about. The second one was NetApp. NetApp does data storage. So all the data that's unique to you is stored in, guess what? A filer. And it's called a filer because people used to have file cabinets. Perhaps that's a file cabinet. So the basis but this is, a large computing device with spinning disks at the time. And I was selling to General Electric, right? So how do we store the data, right? Then I went to a cybersecurity company because I follow trends. I look at the industry of technology, and I can't stay at a company for 30 years because the technology is ever changing. So then I go to cybersecurity, and now I go to Google. I don't have internet at my house.
Which is crazy.
I would say that 1,000% of the people that will watch this podcast, 100%, would say, how do you exist without internet at your house? Especially when you work for IT companies where you're doing sales calls on a day in and day out basis from your computer. The internet is an open door. I don't know. You live in a fairly safe community.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your opinion is, but when you go to bed at night, do you leave your door open?
No.
Do you close your door?
Yeah.
Do you lock your door?
Yes, I do. Sometimes I forget, but yeah.
The internet, in my mind, is literally like an open door to your house. Wildly unpopular to say.
Open door though, so anyone can get in. Mm-hmm. You can get out, mm-hmm. But it's transient, mm-hmm. Right? So how do you can't do video calls or anything without internet, right? So where are we going?
Well, we can talk about the mode of it, but the reality is people look at internet as a utility. Yeah. But it's not a utility because you have other utilities in your life. You have water that supplies your house. It's pretty critical to living. Like you drink water every day. You have gas and electric to heat your house in order to provide shelter for your family. Very important things. Those utilities have something between the person who's supplying it to you and you consuming it. And it's called a meter. When you leave this house and you shut off all your lights and the computer equipment, like you ultimately aren't using the utility. You pay for what you use.
Right.
When you leave the house, you don't leave all your faucets on and the water running. You pay for what you use. The internet is unbound. It's always on. It's not a utility. They want us to spend more time on the internet. And because so, it's an unbound access to basically what's out there in the world.
So is that the big concern with the kids? Is that the accessibility? Is it the addictiveness? Is it? I mean, what? It's interesting you lay it out that way, because when I think of, we'll use water, right, as a utility. Like it's also a finite resource. And while we live in upstate New York where there's plenty of it, there's just lakes everywhere that supply our water. We're in a very fortunate situation in that regard.
Yeah.
You know, there's very rarely a drought here. Like there's water. So leaving a faucet on here would be less of an issue.
Sure.
But it's wasteful.
Sure.
You know, it goes down the drain, it gets sent to a water treatment plant. Like it's wasteful. But in the internet, like it's not wasteful in terms of if it's an open door, it just exists.
Arguably it is. So one, you bring up, all right, what's the consumption from a human standpoint within your four walls? But there's also this concept of IoT, Internet of Things, right? So now we're putting machines on the internet that have an open door policy to whatever it might be, the cloud. So I work for Google. Google bought Nest. Nest makes cameras, thermostats, learning devices that go into the network. Those are always on. Guess what? When you have a whole house that has a thermostat, a smoke detector, cameras, a doorbell type of thing, then Google knows if you're home or not. And for a malicious actor to somehow access, all right, we can tell through trending and through, basically sensors and sound and temperature ratings if the shekels are home or not. When's a good time that the shekels aren't home? And how do we get there? So it's more of the machine learning basis. But then we talk about sustainability, right? So, it's bad to leave the faucet on. Yeah, nobody's going to leave the faucet on. Shut the faucet off when you brush your teeth.
Yeah.
Right? Well, it's a finite resource. Well, guess what? All these machines that are doing compute, network, and storage require electricity, right?
Yeah.
So that's the big argument with like cryptocurrency, right? The amount of energy it takes to mine cryptocurrency is creating a carbon footprint, right? Because these aren't running off of sustainable energy. They're not running off of solar or wind. That's more of a detriment than necessarily leaving the water on a per capita basis. You know what I mean? Like all of a sudden now there's so much computing power that's happening that we're generating. Like what's more harmful to the environment?
So you don't have internet at your house for those reasons. There's so much, there's like so many different ways I want to take this, but it's interesting to me about, the Internet of Things, right? Like everything is out there.
Right.
It's so interesting that how hard is it for someone to actually access your information? It seems like it's so easy, right? But you never hear about it. And the one thing that comes to my mind is I've heard people say like, yes, my information is out there, right? Like I know that I'm on the internet. I know that people can get into my information, but look, AI, machine learning, it's also making stuff easier. Like the fact that the internet knows, Google, whatever the server, whatever the company is that has information on you, whatever they know, like they're making things better because of it. Like where is that balance?
Yeah.
Because like it's good. Your Nest knows when you're home. Well, your Nest knows when you walk by it in the morning, like, hey, kick that heat up, man. Like you got chilly little tootsies on the ground. We got to warm this bitch up, So that's good.
Yes.
Like, what's the balance?
Yeah. I think the balance is going to be dictated by how people feel they're being consumed and marketed by large corporations. So I don't think that we're there yet, but there's this concept of what is Web 2.0. Web 2.0 is Google, it's Meta.
Yeah, it's the social platforms, right? For the most part, I mean, it's that interactive.
Right. And what do they want? What does Web 2.0 want? Web 2.0 wants all your data, all your information. And what they do is they monetize your data and your information. So just to kind of like, I'm not sure if I'm being coherent, but what's going to happen is there's going to be a hard line where people say, I don't want to be monetized anymore just for using the internet. Just because I want to sign on and log on and buy something on the internet, I don't want to be monetized. And that theory, that concept is called Web3 or Web 3.0. So that's right around the corner. From a technologist, for somebody who's made their living solely from technology, I've worked for Google, but Google's not the last place I'll ever work because the technology is changing that quickly. Google will always be, exist. But what does Google want? Google wants your information. They want your data because from data is their revenue stream, their gigantic revenue stream to the tune of about $76 billion per quarter every 3 months. If you have a concept of top line revenue for organizations, that is unheard of. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not, did that?
No, so I'm curious because.
Did we turn that blue light back on?
that thing went off, man. That battery is dead. But I'm curious about this because there is I have a feeling that companies were monetizing us all along. Mm-hmm. Whether it's internet or not, right? No matter what, you're a customer.
Sure.
No matter what, they're either monetizing your data, the information about you, or they're monetizing your desires, like the products and services. And going back as long as you can remember, if you were sold something, maybe it was Tupperware, right? Whoever was selling, they kept a log, So whether that log was digital, whether that log was written on a pad of paper, people were monetizing off this information. I know companies now that sell just email addresses and phone numbers, and they're like, hey, a list. This is a list of people who are decision makers in your industry, and this is how you reach out to them. This is how you market to them.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, but it's not something that's novel.
Right.
People bought addresses, right? We had phone books, that was available forever. So I don't know that it's more of an argument or not. I'd like to bring it back to our kids, right? And how do we keep them, I don't want to say safe, but how do we make sure that they have an understanding of or an awareness of the importance of having some privacy, And I think that's a big question, right? Is how much do you allow your kids to access the internet? And look, our kids are younger now. They're not in middle or high school yet. And I think that it probably gets more into it then, but as a dad, right? I mean, what are your thoughts on accessibility to phones, right? Let's just say 10 years old. Okay. I mean, when should kids, technology, when should a kid get a phone right now?
Yeah. Yeah. So we use this nomenclature of a phone like it's only a phone.
Yeah. No, I know. It's when do they get a GPS computer strapped on their hand?
Yeah. So you have to think this is going to go real basic, real brass tacks. And you start to think, all right, what are the things that enhance my life? What are the things that better my life? Right. So does a phone necessarily better our lives? Yeah, it does for you and me. Just transportation. If I need a ride or if I need to get directions or if I need to communicate with you, I lose my mind to think about in 20 years ago, we'd say, hey, let's meet in New York City in Times Square at 3:00.
It's so crazy.
And then that could have been 2 weeks ago. And then on this day, on the 25th or whatever today, we'd somehow get ourselves to Manhattan, Times Square, and be like, hey, dude, what's going on?
Hey, it worked.
Yeah. And maybe it was more than 20, but along, 25 years ago. So I'm going to just go back to the question. When does the phone enhance the kid's life? And I think that we are in a better position than a generation or not a half a generation in front of us. Meaning I have older siblings whose children were born right around the .com era, 99, 2000. And they had unfettered access to everything that was technology from 8, 9, 10, 11. And it's impacted them negatively. as young adults.
How so?
Because they're always ACAD, man.
Yeah.
You know what ACAD is?
It probably has something to do with ADD, but
Always connected.
Oh,
You're
okay.
right. Always distracted.
Okay.
You cannot. I watch them sit on the couch as a family, when they come in from being away at college for 3 months and they
Just scrolling.
just 6 people on a couch looking at a phone. Like, is that enhancing their life? No, it's not.
Devil's advocate is, are we diminishing our personal relationships so much that the phone is like the solution? That's a legit question, right? Like, if I'm in a conversation with someone and someone picks up their phone and starts typing on their phone, am I engaging enough?
Rude.
It's rude. It's rude, but like, maybe I'm also boring, right? Like, you hope it's not. I think it's probably more like they're addicted. They're trying to find something. Like, they're looking for that hit. But also, like, hey, take a social cue. Like, you're maybe that person doesn't like sitting in the couch with you. Get up and play darts, or like maybe we should walk away and do something else to where, like, hey, you don't feel like you need to be looking for something
Valid point.
different on your phone. No, I'm not saying like give kids phones because you're like boring parents, but
Right. How often do you interface with technology, either on a phone or a iPad or something like that, where you're actually bored?
no, no, probably a fair amount. Like, honestly, if I'm,
Is it always productive? Is it always productive time when you're using those?
No, it's never. No, if I'm picking it up because we're sitting here talking, like, it's never because it's like an actual issue that needs to be, like, I'm not putting fires out.
Right.
That's not the thing. So, but I do think that, like, hey, maybe I think if you are in a situation that is more engaging, then you're going to be less inclined to be reaching for it.
Sure.
Too. So, and that's something where I do feel like a lot of people they tend to maybe just want to sit in their house sometimes because they don't know what they like. And maybe that's also a byproduct of technology, right? Like, if you spend too much time with technology on the phone, at the TV screen, on the computer, right? Like, maybe you don't realize what you like because you've been brainwashed to like technology so much.
Right.
Because for you and I, like, we can go out, we can have a beer and play with the kids in the front yard, throw a football, throw a baseball. Like, that's fun to me. I'd much rather do that than sit around and watch a movie. Like, if I'm watching a movie, like at night, okay, I'm trying to wind down, I'm usually kind of bored. Like, I don't want to watch TV all day. I'm constantly like, hey, turn the TV off. Let's go outside, right? For my brain's just more engaging than me. So how do we teach kids? Do we have to force them? I mean, I guess it's not giving them a phone, but like, how do we teach kids to engage more with nature?
Yeah. So, man, when you talk, there's just so many areas to go to.
Because I have no focus.
No, it's really good, right? Because that's how you want to be a critical thinker, and you want to have multiple streams of, hey, this conversation can lead us here, here, and here. Specifically, the question is, at what age do we deem it appropriate to give a kid a phone? That's one. But then the other thing is, how connected to the real world and to nature and to being outside and to understanding like life on this planet as it exists was meant to be is important, right? So there's just so many streams of communication. I'm going to tell you, back to the base question, when is it appropriate to give a kid a phone? My feeling is it's appropriate to give a kid a phone when they need to communicate directly with you for a needs basis. That being said, allowing that child to have anonymity is a good thing too. For example, our boys play basketball together. We get a communication the day before that says practice is at the middle school gym or whatever it might be. I've often driven my child to the gym and let them get out the door themselves and walk in, not fully confident that I'm dropping them off at the right place. But that anonymity, dude, that like having, I don't want to put my kid in an untenable situation where they're like not at the right spot, even as docile as it would be to do that at our school. But just to say, I need to go find somebody. I need to communicate to them that I might be in the wrong place. Again, I'm not trying to do that. And then I need to solve for something without being able to, mom, dad, you know what I mean? You don't always have to have all the answers, right? Figure out the answer, work towards the answer. So specifically, I probably will have to have some type of communication device for my kid. I'm guessing like 14, and that's going to be late. I think a lot of kids are getting phones now.
I think a lot of them do. Do your kids know your phone number? Because this is funny too, because it's like, okay, well, you can always find someone with a cell phone. Like, unless you're stuck in the woods. Like, if you see people, someone has their phone.
No, but they don't. And that's probably, it's funny. Like, what's your address? Is your address important anymore? What's your parents' phone number? I maintained a home phone for a very long time on the premise that I would teach. But then it's like, all right, how many phone lines do you need in a house?
Yeah, and it just never rings. Like it's just telemarketers the whole time. Although that's now the cell phone too, which is crazy. Oh, actually, how did that happen? The sidebar. I never got until, I don't know, 5 years ago, like telemarketing calls on my cell phone.
So you were saying early on that we weren't sponsored by Buffalo Trace. We're also not sponsored by LifeLock. But the reality is your public information, be it your cell phone number when you input it for any type of subscription service or an online service, it's just being prolificated, right? So here's what we know about Ryan Shekel. We know ultimately what your demographic is, your age, and probably your race or ethnicity. We're going to be able to figure out your home addresses pretty much everywhere that you've ever lived. We're going to know your email addresses, and we're going to know your cell phones and your date of birth. So these are obviously, we in the industry, we call these pedigree. These are pedigree pieces of information. The other thing that's pretty shocking is we can also pretty much determine what your work history is, where you worked, your tenure of where you work. People post it right on LinkedIn. Those are security questions. Like, did you work at this place during this year? And all that stuff is just accessible online. So if you don't have an identity monitoring service for at least yourself and your spouse or your working peer, that's a gap. You're overinsured on your car. You're overinsured on your boat. You might be overinsured on your house, but then you don't take the step to insure yourself against your identity, the crown jewel, the gem of who you are. Like once you have any of those pieces of information that I previously said, like it's open source on you, man. They could literally steal your identity, which proliferates a lot of other stuff. So I have no affiliation with any identity monitoring service, but I have 3 identity monitoring services.
Really?
Yeah. Should we take a pause so you can get one right now?
No. So I do have LifeLock. And it's funny you say that too. I think that for the longest time, mother's maiden name was always the very first security question. It was that in First Pet or whatever it was. It's got to be so easy to find someone's mother's maiden name now.
Right? Yeah.
So, okay, I think Facebook knows everyone's mom. If you're on Facebook and your mom's on Facebook, first of all, everyone's mom is on Facebook.
Yeah.
Like, yes. So they know that. And it's probably in parentheses,
right?
Like right in between the first and the last name. Or at least like you can see, okay, well, that's the mom. And then that's the sister or the brother. Like that's the mom's dad, whatever. It's gotta be so easy to find that information.
I got to share you a story about that real quick. Yeah. I'll make it very quick. In the type of role that I do, there's me, sales, who has like a very general conceptual level of what I'm selling. And then there's engineers. And these are obviously computer engineers, very, very intellectual people, smart people. So I'd gone to a cybersecurity company in 2017, and the person that I was working with was very intelligent from a computer science perspective. And he goes, the day that I decided to close my Facebook account was this day. And I'm not advocating for anybody closing Facebook, but the story that he told me was this. My mother had recently passed away. My mother passed away, and I had uploaded a photo of her and my son when he was an infant. And as I was uploading that photo onto Facebook, it basically stalled and it didn't finish the download. So the whole photo wasn't uploaded on Facebook. And he said, for some reason, I was able to see the metadata of that upload of this photo that I was trying to post on my Facebook account. And it basically gave a readout of what the picture was before the picture was fully uploaded. Grandmother, age, potentially 80 to, and I'm paraphrasing, 80 to 82, holding young infant with, and it gave all these facial characteristics of the photo being uploaded into Facebook. And he's like, that's when I realized that I needed to go ahead and not post family-oriented stuff on Facebook. all the imaging, right? So obviously pictures, any type of description is being uploaded for machine learning and AI to be built against in order to classify what those images are. Who is this person? What's their age? What's their likes? Which is, all that type of stuff. And that blew my mind. It blew my mind that obviously that's how companies are operating. It doesn't make sense. You get it, but that's where we're at. I don't remember how we got to that, but
no, that's fine. It's interesting. As I've gone on this podcast journey, I've tried to understand SEO, right? Because that's how people find you. If you're not, it's the organic marketing aspect of it. It's not, you're not paying Google ads, you're not paying YouTube ads, whatever it is.
I'm with you.
I didn't understand the metadata until looking into SEO. And it's interesting that it can actually pull from these facial features and pictures that you upload. But I didn't realize that like pictures have data embedded in them,
right?
Differently than like, grandma, 80 years old, infant. Like there's so much that goes into this back end part of the internet that you don't see. It's in the closet, right? Like you go into a house for the first time, you're going to like an open house and everything looks clean and shiny on the outside. And you open the closet door and just everything comes tumbling out onto you. That's this metadata. When I upload a picture of this podcast, I'll upload a picture of you, right? Me and you like hugging it out, whatever it is. I'm going to embed data in that picture so people can find it. Like Google, technology, sales, optimization, data security, like all of that is going to be in the title of the image.
Right.
So that Google specifically knows what the image is about so it could feed it to other people that are searching for technology, sales, optimization positions in Internet 2.0, right? It's insane that there's so much on the back end that you don't even see.
A lot of tagging, a lot of classification. Yeah. Like, how can we get this message, whatever it might be, not specifically this, but to the broadest audience that we possibly can? And then what can they take from it, type of thing. And that continues to be what drives the current internet adoption, right? So, I think it's like 90% of all internet searches originate on Google. Might be higher, but it's 90% or higher worldwide, globally.
Mm-hmm. Does that include YouTube?
Yeah.
Because I think YouTube's the second biggest search engine.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, people love video. I mean, video is just so important to the day in our lives presently. So you have that, and then you look at, all right, how many people have a Gmail account? Right. And they're using email and they're using whatever it might be, video or talk or like pay type of thing. Huge amounts of data. So what's the only space that they can glean more data, that they can get more data, is corporate data. Right. So that's Amazon's built a gigantic business around ingesting corporate data. Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, even Google. They'll say, hey, look to round out our working data sets, to add more information about the users, the people, the likes, the dislikes. How can we get corporate data in some form or fashion? Corporate data is treated a little bit differently than personal data, right? Because there's compliance and regulatory bodies that you have to adhere to, which then leads us to the earlier part of the conversation is, when do people say, all right, you can have my data, but it's my data and you owe me. You have to pay me. And that's really the foundation of Web 3.0 or Web 3.
Can we flip it? Can people get paid for their data?
Yes. Yeah, that's where we're going.
How?
So it really comes down to stuff that I'm not overly versed about, but it's basically rewriting the protocols, like the internet protocol. So it's not so open and free, where it says, all right, now there's a protocol that says, Ryan Shekel he actually owns all his data. He owns who he is, his persona, his unique identifiers. And if you want them, then you have to pay Ryan for that. And Ryan can then say, hey, look, if you want this demographic on me, if you want the specifics about a person like me or people, I'll sell it to you. And that is definitely where we're going. That is where Web3 is. And a lot of this is going to be largely built around blockchain. I'm not big into cryptocurrencies, right? It's not my core competency. But the idea of always encrypted secure information between two entities without a third party is the premise of blockchain technology, right? So there's a direct correlation to currency. Right now, if I want to pay you, if I owe you something, I can pay you $20, but there's an intermediary between you and me. That's a $20 bill that's backed by the U.S. Treasury.
Yeah.
There's a way for me to pay you, right? PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, check, whatever it might be. Where blockchain then abstracts that intermediary, and then it allows a peer-to-peer exchange with nobody between us.
Yeah, but it's still currency.
It's how would you say this? It's transposed into currency, right? That's what Bitcoin is. That's what Ethereum is, or Dogecoin, or whatever it might be, right? That then becomes a blockchain technology that allows a cryptocurrency for you.
Man, but how? So what's currency, right? It gets into the whole thing then. What's currency? It's a agreed upon value of an exchange of goods and services in a way, right? Like it's an exchange of value. Bringing it back to the conversation of, can you get paid from an entity, Google, for your information? In my mind, the reason it works for Google and there's not a lot of people being upset about it is because one person out of 7 billion, that amount of information isn't worth a lot individually. That amount of information aggregated over 7 billion is significant, right? So like, what's it worth to you? Just as an example, hey, I'll pay you 1 cent for your identity. Like, okay, I'm going to say no to that, right? So what's this break even? Because my information's not worth much, but 7 billion people's information is. So how is that going to work?
Yeah. So let's walk through that, and let's go back to just round numbers, right? So I had said that Google is doing something like just around 75 billion per quarter in top line revenue. Largely that's based upon search and ads. All right. So then let's extrapolate that on a year. So 150, $300 billion a year in what you do, how you search, and who they can sell it to. $300 billion a year, from a GDP perspective, is probably more than most, if not all, countries out there, other than maybe like the top 20 countries in the world. The business is so profitable that it's more profitable than countries producing, manufacturing, mining, whatever it might be, in their entirety. So there's a value there. We know that there's tremendous value. It's insane. There's tremendous value there. There's $300 billion of revenue per year based upon what you're searching. So how do we get it down to the individual? I don't know that, that's something we solve for today. Basically, people are going to have to say, I don't agree to the standard T's and C's that allow you to have all of my information at no charge, and then monetize it in a large way. So there's a lot there, but it's always that fine line. There's a balance. Like you said, how nice is it to come downstairs in the morning, have the learning thermostat sense that you're there, bring the heat on? There's so many advantages to what technology can do for us on a day in and day out basis, that it's not a yes or no. It's not a we can't have this, we can't have that. There's a blurring of lines, but there's a lot there.
I love it. Dude, this has been fun, man.
Is it over?
It's been an hour. We could go on for hours. We should. What I want to do, let's do this. I'll ask you the final couple questions. We'll just make it a regular thing.
All right. Well, one thought. So just on podcasts, and my question to you is, do you view a podcast in the quality of the podcast based upon how quickly time goes by, or the duration of the podcast? Or is it just, I want to cover these items, and in your mind?
As a podcaster or a podcast consumer?
Both. I'd be interested. Well, first, you're as a podcaster.
As a podcaster, I started a podcast because I'm curious. First and foremost, I understand that is the wrong way to start a podcast. I was curious. I know that I can be better as a person. I can be better as an employee. I could be better as a father, right? So first and foremost, I wanted to understand what made successful people tick. I understood that one of the things I struggled with was communicating efficiently and effectively and concise, more so than anything. I'm a talker. I've taken personality tests. I'm a talker. I work through my issues talking. So dovetail the idea that I like to talk. I work through my issues talking, and I wanted to learn to be a better communicator so that I could apply that to my relationships, my work relationships, and my personal relationships, right? So that's it. Trying to be concise with it, right? And use the skills I've learned as a podcaster. The reason I continue to do the podcast is because I think it's important to tell stories and to heed advice from people who have been somewhere where you want to be. So if someone's listening to this right now and they say, hey, Ryan, you're successful in a sales career. RJ, you seem really balanced. Like you have a great career, but you have a loving wife and kids. What can I take from you? Why do you think this way? What's going through your mind, RJ, that makes you the person you are? Because I want to learn from that. I don't want to be you. I want to learn from you. So I'm seeking individuals that I respect, that I look up to, that I want to learn from. So for me, that's the reason for the podcast. Now, in terms of like, what am I looking for? As a consumer, I want to be entertained. I want to be informed. And I want to feel like I have learned something, but also didn't waste my time listening. What would someone take from this conversation? Well, there's a lot about how to approach a sales cycle. I think that you nailed like how to make a first impression. I think people should listen to that. I think there's a lot of information about how to protect yourself online. I think there's insight into how to think about being a father in an age where there's an internet 2.0, 3.0, And I think there's just a lot of things that someone can casually listen to, and hopefully they're entertained, and hopefully they learn how to make a great old fashioned. And yeah, I think there's a lot that people could take away from podcasting. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah, it does. There's podcasts that I listen to that go for an hour, and it's like that. Or there's podcasts that go for 2 hours that are like that. And it's like, wow, those two people spoke for 2 hours, and it kept me, captivated and interested in what was going on. That's, I think, a pretty good mark of, wow, these people really have it. They're jamming.
Yeah. Hopefully this hour went by quickly. So final 3 questions of the podcast. What's the most impactful book you've ever read?
Wow. Most impactful book I've ever read, so from your podcasts, I'm really realizing how important it is to actually read. As you become a professional, as you become a parent, there's a lot of stuff vying for your times as you sit down with the phone or Netflix or whatever it might be. So I'm reading from one of your podcasts, I'm reading a recommendation that one of your previous guests had called The Road by Cormac MacArthur. It's a bit about like end times, so it's probably really not healthy to be reading right now. But the most important book that I've ever read, I read a book. Obviously, you tend to read more in high school and college, and I read a couple books that I reread to the boys. Right, I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, so I recently read Hatchet by Gary Paulson to my 10-year-old and my 7-year-old. There's a book called Walkabout. That is really, it takes place in South Africa with Aborigine. It takes place in Australia, and it talks about Aborigines people and, the power of the mind over the body. And I would say that book has definitely left a mark on my thinking about us as human beings walking on this planet and the control that we actually have over ourselves from one thing. And that's so I need to reread it. It's definitely too early to reread it to my kids. It's probably, I would say maybe like a 10th, 11th grade reading level. So it's not, you would be able to read it like that. But Walkabout was a pretty,
Walkabout.
Yeah.
Nice. I'll check it out. I have not, I've never heard of it even. It's amazing actually asking that question 60 something times, like the amount of books that I've read, I'm like, okay, good. Like I'm on the right path, but then also half or more, where I'm like, oh, wow. Like I haven't read that book or I haven't heard of it. Like there's so much out there. There's more consumption. Like I need more, gotta get better. If you could have a drink with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? What would you drink and why?
I'd be very inclined to sit down with probably one of the most lackluster leaders that has lived in the 20th century. And I would think that that person would be Harry Truman. As president of the United States, and I'm not, a scholar and I'm not a historian by any means, but my understanding is as president of the United States, as World War II ended, he had some very, very tough decisions to make, which has put us on a course and a path of where we are today with warfare, with technology, with humanity, with the role that the United States plays as a global figure. And he ultimately, my understanding is, passed away like unwealthy, without means. And he was probably one of the last presidents to have gone through the presidency that didn't monetize it in some form or fashion, from book writing, from speaking engagements, whatever it may be. So I would be very in tune to sit down with him, to probably drink a gin and tonic, because he seems like a gin and tonic type of guy, and really say, how do you handle through uh, very, very, very uncertain times that led the United States into a very the forefront and focus of having to be, present in a lot of world events.
Man, that'd be interesting to hear. Interesting. I like that. I've never heard Harry Truman as the answer to that.
No one would ever say that except me.
Yeah, I know, right? All right. The Every Breath Counts podcast. It's about a lot of things. I described some of them when you asked the question about podcasting. But what it's mainly about is taking the time to optimize your life. It's saying, hey, I want to make my mind better, my body better. I want to make my career better so that I can live a better life and enjoy every breath I take. And the reason that I started the podcast is one of the big ways that I make every breath count in my life, amongst many others. How do you make every breath count in your life?
Yeah. So I have to preface what I'm about to say with my view of who you are in the podcast. And I don't say this lightly, and I'm very sincere. You pack a lot of inspiration in the conversations we have, and the person that you are and how you lead your life. And a lot of people are lacking, really substance to what is the thing that makes them value their life and do better every day. For you, obviously, it was your diagnosis of cystic fibrosis. Most people don't have hurdles to overcome in their lives on a day in and day out basis that make them say, I need to be better. I want to be better. There's room to be better. And, as unfortunate it is that you've had that diagnosis, that you've had that illness, you're amazing. Ultramarathon runner, obviously running a podcast, successful career, beautiful family. So I want to pay you that respect. On a day in and day out basis, I don't have, at this point in my life, something that says you must do this. You need to find that. Other than the fact that I found out very early on, going to back to our conversation about what is it that you do for a living. I found out very early on that I wanted to be defined not by the minutia, by the small things that people feel are important in order to build a reputation, but realistically who I am. How can I be responsible and accountable for the reputation that I want to build, that I want my sons and daughters to have, and my wife? So I came up with this phrase very early on when I kind of saw like petty stuff between people in the business world, in friendships, as people were trying to gain, just become more popularity and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And the saying is very simple. I choose not to play at that level. And you might like me and you might not like me. And that's something that I have to deal with. And I've also found out that you can't make fans of everybody. But I really try to live my life every single day in a way where I'm going to operate in a way that my reputation is who I am. And I'm not going to play at that level. And I hope to befriend you. I hope to be sincere with you. I hope to build something that's long lasting and meaningful. But you can't do that with everybody.
Dude, that's powerful. I love that. Well, I want to acknowledge you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today, and just coming over and sharing a whiskey with me. And it's funny because I know a lot of people. I've met a lot of people. I've crossed a lot of paths. And I'm always reluctant to have a friend or someone that I consider a friend on the podcast that I've known before a podcast, right? Like I generally will look for people who wrote books who are trying to have PR surrounding their name. But when you said you'd be willing to come on, I was excited because the one thing that I look for in terms of a guest is someone that I respect, someone who has achieved something that I look at as being like good and powerful and strong and like, yes, like that people are going to respect you for not only your career, but for building the reputation and the family that you've built. And it's not easy. It's not easy to be steadfast in your beliefs, and it's not easy to build a career and monetize your reputation. So RJ, thank you so much, man. This has been awesome. Guys, if you want to find him, I'll have any links that he wants to share up in the show notes. But otherwise, enjoy the rest of your week. Don't play at that level and make every breath count.